Oh.
All right. Hello, aviators. Hello, skygazers. Welcome back to Project AVIATE's Up and Away after how many weeks? 3 weeks. We're so excited to have you back. And we're back to skygazing as usual, back to flying planes as usual, back to our horrendous but amazing slides as usual. And it's Friday again. We're starting a little bit late again. Apologies, events in our school. So now that we're back at it, let's just jump right into it. So, as you know from the email that we sent out to you both a couple weeks ago and last night, we'll be covering a new part of the flight training series, which should start to conclude out our entire up and away program pretty much, and that is cross country, flying from point A to point B. You all know how to start up your aircraft from startup to shutdown after doing takeoffs, landings. You know how to operate your plane. You know how to do hand-eye coordination. You know how to keep your airplane safe, maintain it properly, keep it in good condition. You know how to talk to air traffic controllers with the proper phraseology and terminologies. And also, what else do you know? There's one more thing I'm missing. You know how to navigate an airport. You understand the fundamental structure of an airport, as well as the different control frequencies for your air traffic control, depending on where you are relative to your airport, whether it's departing or arriving, things like that. So now that you know how to fly a traffic pattern, you know how to go in circles around an airport, you know how to do anything pretty much within an airport, but now we're ready to graduate from that, right? We're ready to move on from staying within an airport and start venturing away, venturing up and away. Haha. Venturing up and away from our home airport. So that takes us to our guiding question of the day. We are not going to be the only people who want to go to different airports. There will be many other planes in the sky of all different shapes and different sizes, and all of them want one thing: the airport to take off and land. And this can be anything from your small planes like the one that we're in today. As you can see, our Cessna 172. There are many small airplanes like this. You got your single engines, your double engine propeller powered aircraft. But then you also have planes like your jets. You have all these jets that could be flying around, or perhaps these smaller propeller aircraft, or I guess that doesn't count as a propeller aircraft, but that's fine. But we have so many different planes in the sky, and we need to be able to deal with all these planes at all sorts of different airports. So that brings us to a fundamental problem that we need to solve in aviation. How do we manage, as the guiding question says, how do we manage aircraft of all different sizes at different airports? And the reason this matters is because all these aircraft, because they vary in size and because they vary in purpose, they vary in speed. And if you're trying to take off and land airplanes, multiple airplanes, at an airport in a coordinated manner, and you have one plane that's just slowly landing and another plane that's coming really fast trying to land, that's where things get dicey, right? That's where things start to get disorganized. So we need to have a system, per se, to categorize which aircraft belong to what kind of airport. And the reason this matters is, let me show you a map of the Bay Area. This is a map of the Bay Area, taken off of Apple Maps. Apple, don't sue us, please. But this is Apple Maps, and as you can see, we've got airports all over the Bay Area here. I wonder if I do this, will you see my mouse? No, you won't see my mouse. Okay, that's okay. You'll see the airports in blue. The airports in blue are the actually, how about I just take it off the slide and use it here. So the airports in blue, you see here San Carlos, you have San Francisco, you have Palo Alto, you have San Jose Airport, which, by the way, we're parked at right now. You got Hayward up here, Oakland up here, and for those of you who live in the Bay Area, you probably know international flights, all the big planes that you've probably been on at the airport come out of San Francisco or Oakland or San Jose. These are the big three airports of the Bay Area, and then you have the rest, which serve small planes like the ones that we're training in Up and Away. These Hayward Executive, Palo Alto, San Carlos, Half Moon Bay, and of course Reed Hillview, which is not in the map. But we have to deal with this, right? How do we deal with this? So let's take a simple Let me actually make some space here. Let's take a simple setup here. Oh, that's right. There's a reason I had this here, so I could draw on it. You have your airport here, got airports here, small airports, and then your major ones, so San Francisco, Oakland, San Jose. Whoa. Like that. And so how do we deal with this? Well, let's take, for instance, okay, great. Let's start with just two airports near each other. Two airports that are near each other. Let's say you got one nice and long runway here and another short runway here. And this airport holds like small planes, and this airport has really big ones, right? And then you have like a terminal with gates. I still think that the way I draw terminals looks like a spider, but I don't know. Don't forget, all airports have taxiways, so here's a parking area. Similarly, here's a parking area. Maybe we'll go ahead and make the music a little louder. Alright, so two airports just in an area. Now, the first thing that you've actually already seen happen here is we've started to organize these airports by size of aircraft. And this is the first fundamental way we organize airplanes, by size, because size pretty much means speed in this case. And why is that? Because bigger airplanes need more lift, and to get more lift, you need to go faster, pretty much, unless you're a helicopter, but we don't talk about helicopters. So here's a big airport, here's a small airport. We call these having different classes, so classification. And classifications are just letters, so they can be A, B, C, D, E, or G in aviation. And each different type of class has their... Actually, airports don't get Class A. They just get B through G. Airports of different class letters have different kinds of restrictions associated with them, but just know that as you sort of go bigger, as you go backwards in the list, the fancier the airports get. And by fancier, I mean you're usually supporting bigger planes, your airports have control towers in them, because not every airport has a control tower. But just know that earlier in the alphabet equals fancier airports. Usually, that's the trend. Okay, great. So now we have an area that has two airports in it that have planes of different size. Now we have to address the second problem, right? Now you can't just call an airport whatever and say, okay, planes of this size go here, planes of that size go there, right? Because planes fly. Planes don't just sit in an airport and do nothing, right? Planes fly. So that's the second problem. How do we deal with the fact that planes fly? That's our question. Planes fly, what do we do? So, let me explain why this is a problem. Say you have an airplane here in this tiny airport that wants to go on a joyride to somewhere over there. There's another small airport off the map that's somewhere over there. Say we have a big airplane here that needs to take off and fly south. Takes off, maybe does a U-turn, goes this way. How do we deal with this, right? This airport will also have landings, so there will be landings like this, and perhaps planes over here will come like this and land. Perhaps planes that want to come to this airport right here will come from here and do a loop and then come land. You know, it depends, right? So this sounds like a really complex problem, but the fundamental way to start solving this problem is to realize that if you were to look at an airport from the side, so if this is your terminal building and you have planes, there's a landing gear, wings, and a tail, right? Here's a runway. Airplanes take off, and go in an upward slant like this. Airplanes land, come in on a downward slant like that. That looks terrible. So the idea here is, with these slants, what do we realize? At different locations in an airplane's takeoff, they will be at a certain height. In another place, they'll be at a greater height. I guess I could do this like this. And another place, they'll be at an even greater height. And same thing for landing. If you're landing here, you're probably closer to the ground. But if you're way out here, you're still higher up. Right? So this is how landing taking off works. You know this. So what if we establish boundaries? We need to have boundaries around airports to tell different kinds of planes where they can fly and what for, so that we can avoid, if this plane... Imagine this scenario, right? Imagine this scenario. You have your plane going this way, and then another plane's coming in to land like this. Imagine you have this scenario. If you don't want them to collide, if you want the plane coming into the big airport to maintain a perfect descent like this, then you need your small plane to fly under them. Whoa. You need your small plane to fly under, at a height much lower than H2. So at a different height here, let's say H lower. And this is how we start going out and establishing boundaries. So we can go ahead and say, okay, this big airport right here, big planes landing here, this airspace, the airspace around this airport right here starts at, I don't know, let's say this is around 3,000 feet, right? Let's say this is around 3,000 feet. At the minimum. And then let's say there's other planes flying around, like there's another plane just up here going absolutely past the airport, right? We don't want planes that are trying to come into this airport to intersect with this plane, right? So we can establish an upper bound. Let's say up here, let's put a cap at, let's say if this plane's at, I don't know, 20,000 feet, then we can put a cap up here at 18,000 feet. So planes coming into this airport, your airspace belongs to between 3,000 feet and 18,000 feet. And I will put a ceiling on top of that. That's sort of a very fundamental notation that we like to use, and you'll see why. So minimum of 3,000 feet and maximum of 18,000 feet. So that means if you're an airplane coming out of this tiny airport right here, if you're an airplane coming out of this tiny airport here, now you can fly here. Now you can fly through this approach path of another airport safely, so long as you stay below the minimum altitude of 3,000 feet. So now you can safely pass this at, let's say, 2,000 feet. You can go this way at 2,000 feet. Everything is fine. Similarly, let's do one more example. Say we have planes coming here from the north and big planes from the north coming and doing a loop-de-loop to come in and land, as you see here. This loop right here. Music's getting a little loud, huh? Let's reduce that a bit. Okay. So you want planes to come in and do a little circling to land like this, or perhaps if they're flying a traffic pattern, right? This resembles a traffic pattern pretty much, this blue path that you see here. But you also have planes here, right? So we can go ahead and designate another airspace region around this airport specifically, like this, for instance. And let's say planes here want to keep an altitude of up to 5,000 feet. So let's say small planes flying at this airport want up to 5,000 feet. Let's say. I don't know, just they want that much in altitude. And you can say the minimum altitude for them is the ground because, I mean, they don't really need to be... No plane is trying to go under them. These are the smallest of smallest airplanes. No big jumbo jet commercial plane should be going under them by any means in this case. So you could put a minimum altitude of 0 feet. So that means all these big planes that want to come into this big airport right here can fly here at 7,000 feet, for instance. They can fly above at 7,000. Actually, that might be a little close. They might do like 8,000 or something. Who knows, right? Regardless, we have now established an airspace around this airport and an airspace around this airport, both with different restrictions, different altitude restrictions, and depending on the class of airport that you're dealing with. So let's say this big airport is a class Bravo, and let's say this small airplanes have a class Delta, a class Bravo airport will get a class Bravo airspace associated with it, and a class Delta airport will get a class Delta airspace associated with it. Pretty much. And once again, we've made up these numbers. These are not the exact numbers used on the charts that we'll show you. But to give you an idea of why we have airspace classifications, the idea of avoiding collisions like this, and so different types of airplanes can fly in their respective airports safely, and they don't have to worry about colliding with each other so long as they follow the rules. This is why we have different airspace and airport classes. And we could have obviously shown you, this monstrosity. We could have shown you this disaster of a chart to explain to you the same thing, but this is the what's called VFR sectional, Visual Flight Rules sectional of the Bay Area, and it has pretty much all these lines. It's the same idea, just made a lot more complicated. There's lines going all over the place because, like we said, the Bay Area has so many airports in it. So they need a lot of these lines moving around to tell airplanes, different kinds of airplanes, where they can fly and where they can't. And the reason that's part of a problem is because you have San Francisco Airport here, and it's class Bravo airspace, so the Bravo airspace, which corresponds to San Francisco Airport, it extends all the way out here. You see this blue line right here is airspace that belongs to San Francisco Airport, pretty much. So San Francisco Airport has to deal with all this airspace. And they're using a similar notation. So this would just mean 6,000 feet at the minimum, 10,000 feet at the maximum. These are written as flight levels, so you multiply these numbers by 100 and you get the altitude that it's corresponding to. And it's the same idea everywhere. And notice different airspace boundaries have different colors for the different class of airspace that they correspond to. And there's a lot of rules that tell you which color corresponds to which class of airspace, and again, what altitudes they correspond to. I'm not going to do that so much, as these are all things that you can study as part of ground school, but we want to give you an idea of why these exist and how these are helping keep aviation a lot more safe. And so with that, we're now ready to, now that we've figured out, okay, we have multiple airports in the area, we've figured out a way to separate different kinds of planes flying in different ways at different altitudes and different speeds. We found a way to organize them. Great. Now planes can fly safely. Now we want to help those planes who can now fly safely fly to their destination. That's the next step. This is the second part of our lesson today in navigating. We want to be able to get airplanes not only safely but in a streamlined fashion to their destination, because now we're not just dealing with traffic patterns anymore. We're dealing with planes that want to go from point A to point B. And to sort of touch on why this is actually a really big challenge, I'll have Calvin go ahead and discuss the question that you're probably wondering. Actually, before we get there, I just wanted to show you this one picture. You have different airspace classifications, as I told you, and they correspond to different altitudes by default, and you can see them here. You can see, like, with class Golf on the left, they can go up to 14,500 feet. Or if there's an airport that the airspace corresponds to, then the airspace restriction might change. Similarly, big airports like class Bravo can have different and larger airspaces associated with it as you go higher up, because planes are descending and they're still far away. So that's why when you go up, you're usually covering more area, and just like that. So this is a very common diagram that people like to refer to. But anyway, now that we understand airport and airspace classes, we're ready to go from point A to point B. You're probably wondering this, right? And I'll have Calvin go ahead and debunk this a little bit.
So the question just basically says, why can't we just directly fly from point A to point B, right? Because you all know the straight line is the fastest way to a certain destination. But the reason is actually very important to why we can't fly to point A to point B. So what you have is a system that allows planes to not crash into each other or have a lot of like congestion stuff. So if similarly to how on a road you can't just drive your car directly from your house to like a grocery store, you have to follow a certain network of roads to get there. But you'll also notice that while you're going down that road, you probably won't see any, like you probably won't meet anybody who is going to like a completely different place. So you'll have a certain pathway that is designed well for that specific route from your house to the market, to the store. And similarly for anybody else who wants to go to the store, you'll also be with them. So in this, the way that it is designed, it's for maximum efficiency so that the cars can get to where they need in a fast manner, but at the same time without risking any unwanted interactions between different planes and on roads, different cars. So as you can see in the picture, we have like a highway intersection, right? So basically you see how the highway below the bridge, that's just one big one. And then above it, there's another one going in the opposite direction. You don't just have it crossing, right? So you need to specifically lay out what the pathways that you can take in aviation because you don't want anything bad happening, such as collisions. So basically, there are basically a bunch of directions that you have to follow on departure and arrival, and then that's how you basically have a decide how you're going to get to a certain airport.
All right. Thank you, Calvin. So let's go ahead and illustrate the problem that Calvin was starting to talk about. I've quickly drawn out here sort of the airports in the Bay Area, kinda. Mainly just their runways. So actually, this is San Francisco, this is San Jose, this is Oakland. You know, I kind of did my best here. The problem Calvin is talking about is that, okay, now that we want planes to go from point A to point B, let's say we have a plane here at Reed Hillview down here who wants to go, I don't know, to Half Moon Bay, right? Let's say they want to go to Half Moon Bay. A straight line path, let's literally take out a ruler and draw this, a straight line path would be this, right? Let's draw it. There you go. This is a straight line path. I suppose you already noticed the first problem. It's just cutting through San Jose, right? You can't just let this plane go, okay, let's just go through San Jose, right? There's planes landing here. There's big planes, Boeing 737s and such, trying to land here. And I guess take off from here, right? You can't have this. Similarly, if we want, let's say we have, this is Hayward Airport up here. This is Hayward Airport. And if we wanted a plane that wants to go from Hayward to Half Moon Bay, like this, straight line path, you got giant planes trying to land in San Francisco. This is the approach onto the runway, like this. Planes are gonna be here, like on this path. You can't really allow that, right? And so the way we have to do this is important. Just like how we have highways on the ground to allow a mass amount of cars to go from one place to roughly another place very quickly, which saves time. We do that in the skies too. And highways in the sky are literally called airways. And they, on charts, they'll usually just be like, they'll have them drawn out as lines like this. And they'll have names like, they'll have weird names, just like how highways are just numbers. Airways are also just numbers and letters. Any combination of them, pretty much. And not really any restriction on letters. So you can have highways in the sky. But something else that airports also have is designated approach paths, designated takeoff paths, etc. Let's take, for example, let me go ahead and erase these. Let's take, for example, one of the best examples. The coordination between San Jose Airport and San Francisco Airport. So most planes coming into San Francisco have to either come from the north like this, so they'll often come down here, loop-de-loop, come back to land. Sometimes they'll come from the north like this, loop-de-loop, come to land, like this. Okay, we have this problem. And we also have airplanes at Oakland that want to land, so they can come like this, for instance, right? And I understand that's completely crossing with Hayward. Don't worry about Hayward Airport right now. Let's just pretend Hayward doesn't exist. Let's say you want planes to come in and approach like this. And you see why this is perfect, right? So if instead we allowed planes to just come in not like this, if we allowed straight in approaches, as they call it, into all these airports, let's say we allowed planes to come in like this, and then come in like this, come in like this, right? Maybe do their loop, come in like this. Now you have planes at San Jose who want to go north, but as they go north, they're going to have a little oopsie with planes here. If they want to go northeast, they're going to have a little oopsie with planes here. How do we deal with that, right? And so the really cool thing about San Jose and San Francisco and Oakland, the way they coordinate their planes around is, okay, we have approaches into San Francisco that curve like this, or like this, okay? This gives San Jose, actually, and Oakland has approaches that come in like this. Or sometimes they'll come in way from the east, turn, and then come in. Now what that does, what this coordination does, is gives San Jose space. Now it has all this free space to allow its airplanes to take off and go this way. But this is still not enough, right? This is still not enough. At this point, planes might be at 3,000 feet, let's say, and planes landing into Oakland will also be at around 3,000 feet. That's no good. So what San Jose does, actually, is force their planes to take off, do a loop around the airport, and then go. Because by the time they complete the loop, they'll be at around, let's say, 15,000 feet here. Whereas the Oakland planes are, once again, 3,000 feet. No conflict. Everything is fine. And this is how we coordinate airplanes at airports. Every airport has designated flight paths for departing and arriving, as well as not only arriving near the airport, so there's often procedures to come in to an airport, like it'll have a name of a arrival procedure. Then you have the actual landing procedure. That's its own chart. And runways have their own charts associated with them. So these are our highways in the sky. These are our roads, our intersections, blah, blah, blah. And so let's go back to the slides and get rid of the tablet. So we have roads, we have highways in the sky. We have paths that we want to create so that planes can easily move around each other without conflicting with each other. We have designated paths for that, as you see, as we just drew. Now is the final problem. The final problem is that we need an efficient way to do that on an airplane's navigation system. And let me show you what we have here in the cockpit. Especially back in the early days, this is all you had. If you're looking at your six-pack, this is all you had. And you didn't really have GPSs back then, but nowadays most planes have GPSs on board like this. So what do, right? We need aids, as in navigational aids. Please don't take that the wrong way. We need things to help us navigate these paths that we created. And these are called navigational aids. And they come in two forms. So it used to be, actually, that airplanes would have landmarks on the ground, and there are still some to this day. I think there's somewhere in the east coast of the US, the Midwest maybe, there are still like big markers on the ground that pilots would have to look down at and find so that they knew they were going in the right direction. This was what early airways looked like, pretty much. But nowadays, we have something special, and you're looking at a picture of it right now. We have omnidirectional radio range towers, shortened to VOR. Don't ask me where the V came from. Like, aviation has some strange acronyms for stuff, and this is one of them, VOR. What this does is just a giant radio tower that shoots out lasers in all 360 degrees for any airplane in the sky to receive those signals. And let me show you what that looks like with a drawing. So let's say we have a little tower here, a VOR tower, and they look like this usually, as you saw in the picture. Look like this usually. They're just going to shoot like lasers in all directions, like this, right? And then an airplane flying here, let's say, an airplane flying here will be able to receive those radio signals and therefore talk to this tower right here, this VOR tower, this VOR, and by that know where it is. So VORs also have what's called distance, some of them anyway, have distance measuring equipment. And it does what it sounds like. It tells you the distance, pretty much. It tells you this distance, actually. It tells you this slanted distance like this. From an airplane to the tower. And just like that, we now have a very interesting way of giving airplanes the means to navigate these paths that we just created. Let me show you what that looks like. So, the picture that you're looking at is one taken by one of our officers, Henry, over in West Lafayette at Purdue University. But we're here in the Bay Area, so let's say we have a little VOR right here. And this is usually this is one of the notations for a VOR, if I can draw it right. Oh, that looks kind of bad. Close enough. I don't know. Anyway, let's say we have a VOR there, right? And it's... I'm going to go ahead and erase these. And let's say I want to have... Yeah, okay. Let's say we have an arrival procedure into San Jose that looks exactly like this, the one that I've drawn right here. This is the arrival procedure to get to San Jose Airport. How do we make use of this VOR? This VOR just shoots lasers in all directions, right? What do we do? All right, here we go. We can have it shoot out a laser here at a certain distance, D1. We can have another laser. It's just shooting out lasers in all directions, right? So this is another distance away on the arc. I suppose I should have drawn these distances like this, D1, D2, D3, all different distances, and we're in an airplane, right, that has a radio receiver that receives information from this VOR. And so on a chart, if we're told what direction this is supposed to be, so if we were, let's say, on a heading, if this was a heading of 010, then the direction this way would be, oh, I don't know, probably, if you go this way, this is more towards the, what would this be? This would be like 200, what would it be? I'm trying to think. If this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay. I'm gonna change this number real fast. Let's say this is like 050 degrees. Then this direction might be 010 degrees. And this will be on a chart. This will tell you, okay, when this VOR is at 010 degrees relative to your present position, then you're here. Okay? When the VOR is then 0, let's say, 350 degrees relative to your location, then you're here. And this was how navigating used to be in a lot of cases. A lot of planes only had these radio receivers, and this is how they would know where they are. They would just be given a direction of the VOR, and that's how they knew where they were. And that was it. So this is probably one of the most critical means of navigational aids, VORs. The second kind is the more modern kind, and it's the stuff that actually enables us to do more curvy paths. Because if you notice, if you just have specific points like this, you don't really get to do this arc, right? You don't really get a nice smooth arc, but it's more like a straight line. So your paths don't look like perfect arcs, they instead are just straight lines like this that sort of lead to an approach point, like that. So they're straight lines. How do we get these nice curvy round paths, you say? This is something you can't really do with a VOR, except in one case. It's called an arc, a VOR DME arc, but we're not going to explain that right now. The other way is the simple way. It's just straight up GPS coordinates. So giving this a latitude and longitude, something like this. Coordinates, right? And your GPS, your Apple Maps, your Google Maps, all that stuff, this is pretty much what they use. Exact coordinates for all the places you want to go to. And that is what aviation, at least modern aviation, now starts to use. And this involves needing a GPS, like the one that you see in your Cessna cockpits, actually. Let me show you. This thing right here is a GPS that can recognize GPS coordinates, but in aviation, we don't want to have to, if we want to plan a route where you have all these waypoints like this, right? You don't really want to type out every single coordinate like this, right? You don't really want to do that. And so we give them names. And if you want to know how we name these waypoints, as we call them, they're called waypoints. Actually, more specifically, they're called fixes because they're a fixed GPS coordinate. They're just called fixes. If you're wondering how we name them, we don't name them coordinates. No, we don't do that. We give them pretty much any random string of 5 letters. All fixes are 5 letters long, and they can be literally any set of 5 letters you could possibly imagine, put together. Sometimes they're words to honor people, like over at Los Angeles airports, there's the Kobe and Gianna waypoints to honor Kobe Bryant and his family during that helicopter crash. But in San Francisco, on the approach path, there is a waypoint called Menlo, and that is near Menlo Park, the baseball. That is a baseball stadium, right? It's a baseball stadium, Menlo Park. Right, Calvin?
I have no clue.
Come on, Calvin, you're supposed to know this stuff.
You're also to...
Okay, so sometimes the waypoints will be words. I know in Florida there's an airport, I think Orlando Airport, there's an approach procedure whose waypoints are like Disney characters. And it's so stuff like that. Airports, especially in the US, can get pretty creative with their waypoint names, but oftentimes it's just random string of letters. Like, you'll just see, I can bet you this waypoint exists. Just, you know. And yeah, so that's it. It's just GPS coordinates and VORs. And nowadays planes have software on them that can actually calculate what these curves are supposed to be. So these curves are predefined already. So that, because you notice, even with just waypoints, you can only do straight lines, right? Like, you can only do this. But nowadays airplanes have the ability to sort of calculate what the curves should be. They can calculate these curves. But the most fundamental form of navigation, again, is VOR with radial directions. So these are directions to a VOR, but when they list it, they'll often write it as a radial and then not 350 degrees, but 170, because it's the exact opposite. So this indicates this direction, pretty much. This is how it's written on charts. R dash, the radial direction. The direction away from the VOR, and that's how you know your position. Oh, you can't even look at it. I wasn't even showing my thing. Again, sorry, let me explain that. So, I was explaining earlier how you can have curves going into the airport like this. You can have these curves, right? Airplanes have software to calculate what these curves are supposed to look like. But the most fundamental form of navigation is VOR and radials. So radials are the direction away from a VOR as opposed to towards it, which is contrary to what you might... It's a little bit counterintuitive, but they'll often listed in the charts as R dash radial of, and then a direction. So it could be 170 degrees like this, and that just means this direction is 170 degrees. And that tells you where you are. So that's it. That wraps up for navigation. Let's go ahead and address any questions. Calvin, can you drop the Q&A form in the chat as well in case you want it to be anonymous and ask questions anonymously? All right, so we have a question. What if the navigation system fails randomly due to some battery damage or something? Then do you do the old school way of navigating? So we don't really have the old school way. If by old school way you mean markers on the ground, we don't really have those anymore. But many airports do have what's called visual approach procedures, and this involves looking for landmarks on the ground. So certain buildings, or perhaps a park, or perhaps a river. These are landmarks that pilots can look towards to come in towards an airport. If their navigation system fails, what will happen is they don't actually have navigational ability. They can't reference a VOR. They can't reference any GPS coordinates. They'll just have to be guided down by air traffic control, and air traffic control will clear other airplanes from their path so that they can give the airplane in need a direct path to the airport as best as they can. And usually this is very, very, very rare of an incident because planes, especially all the big ones you fly on all your trips around the country or internationally, all of them have backups and then backups to the backup. So they can pretty much always generate power in flight no matter what. Almost always. So loss of navigation is pretty much becoming a non-issue nowadays. All right. Did you send the Q&A form? I don't see the link.
I'm pretty sure I did. Do you not see it?
I do not see it.
Let me send it again.
Yeah, send it in the chat again.
Do you see
All
it?
right. Are you talking about the YouTube chat?
Yeah.
Weird, because... Oh, it just might not be showing up for me. I might have to reload my page. So, anyways, that does it, aviators and skygazers, for this lesson. We hope this has made the understanding of airspace and different kinds of airports and the ways of navigating a lot more clear. We have a system of allowing airplanes to go from point A to point B safely and on designated paths, on designated highways and roads in the sky, so that there's no conflicts with each other, so that they can keep a good vertical distance apart and also a good horizontal distance apart. And next week, we'll go ahead and start applying this knowledge into actually planning a flight from point A to point B, following these new restrictions that we've learned and these paths that we've learned. We hope this lesson has been helpful. It's Friday. Have a wonderful long weekend. And take care. Make sure to go out and stay skygazing. Any last words, Kelvin?
No, I'm not dying yet.
All right.
No,
That sounds very hopeful. All right. Thank you all for joining. We'll see you later.